thank you all for making time to come and talk about persistent identification for instruments, and in this case, what is a facility? I'm going to kick us off and welcome you all, and also make an acknowledgement of country. So I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land they're meeting on today, and that's the Turrbal and Yagara people. This is unceded land, and it's a traditional location for learning and sharing. And I'm very lucky to work, play, and live here where the jacarandas are currently flowering. So I pay my respect to elders past and present. We've got our standard slide. Is there anyone new to RDA here? We're all seasoned RDA. Oh, kind of. Oh, welcome. Welcome, and thank you for coming along. They're still kind of new. So I'm going to start off with the agenda here. We are hopefully going to speed through this, but if you have any questions at any point, just stick up your hand. We are really happy to be flexible here as well. So we're going to begin with the problem statement and summary of previous discussions, because this is a discussion that started a while ago in the PIDs group. So I'm going to ask my co-chair, Rolf, to come up and talk.
Yeah, hi everybody. So, what is the topic that we are discussing today, and what were the discussions before? So all have started with Rory, who is in the room. No, we had a very nice, session in the last, the second last plenary, but the last, in-person plenary in Costa Rica. That was organized by the Working with PIDs and Tools interest group with a lengthy title that I won't read out at the moment, but was essentially discussing the questions of what PIDs should we use for facilities to identify them. And it was a nice discussion in the room, and there were several candidate PIDs that have been mentioned. Most prominently it was RAWs and PIDs. But there was no consensus. There was, for each of the options, there were people standing in the room and saying, no, that is not appropriate, you cannot do that. And it was, at the moment, not so quite clear why this divergence is, but if you say, we think of that discussion, it is, at least to my impression, it was more or less obvious that people had different concepts in mind of what a facility is without making that explicit. And then we were discussing about different things and therefore came to different conclusions, and we didn't came to consensus. So as a follow-up on that, we sat together and said, okay, we need to work that out, and we decided to have a follow-up session in the virtual plenary in April. That was a joint session with the Working with PIDs and Tools interest group and the PIDs working group, where we wanted to work a little bit more on the concept of what is a facility. And we had a few invited contributions who presented what is a facility in their community. And we were hoping to, okay, once everybody makes that explicit, it would be easier to discuss. And again, it was a very constructive and useful discussion. Actually, at that point, I was assuming we make that follow-up discussion and clarify things, and that's it. But it wasn't, because in the session there was a clear people saying clearly, no, we should prepare some document, we should prepare some help for people to make the appropriate choice. And that was the activity since. So we had some work on that, and it was at least from my perception, already clear that we would not come up with one single solution, because there is no one size fits all. But we wanted to compile a document collecting case studies where, say, different communities describe what their concept of a facility is and what they draw for conclusions on how to identify them. And the hope is, once you have that document and see the different, say, concepts of a facility, then you can position yourself somewhere in that landscape and make an informed choice of what fits for you, for your concept of a facility. Well, this document has been worked on. It is by far not ready. Siobhan will present that. And yeah, now we have another session where we want to present the status of that work as we are at the moment. And yeah, so this will be the subject of the next session, of the remainder of that session. But before that, I want to say a few words about the semantic model for facility. Surprisingly enough, although all the people have different concepts in mind for what a facility is, the fundamental semantic model is not so much disputed. So there's more or less agreement on this general picture, at least from the feedback that I get. I don't know whether you would say contradict to that. So we have facilities. Facilities are operated by organizations. Facilities have instruments that take data. And of course, people are very important. People are, say, staff members in organizations. They operate the facilities, but they're also maybe the same, maybe not the same people, also users of the facility, and they use the instruments to collect data. So that is more or less the model. And there are a few, say, minor discussions on some of these relation arrows. So there is, for instance, the discussion is, are the instruments parts of the facility or not? Or is the facility just providing the infrastructure for the instruments to run, and are these separate? But these are, say, minor details. And I could also say, drawn a line between people and instrument. Of course, also people run instruments and manage them. I didn't want to overcrowd that picture. That was a simple reason to omit that. But when we come of what actually are the disagreements on the concepts, then at least to my perception it is that the boundaries of some of these bubbles, of some of these entities are blurred for some people. And it is different of which bubbles coalesce for some people and which for the other peoples. So if you do have an organization that does nothing else than running one single facility, then you will probably not so much distinguish the organization and the facility. You will consider it to be one thing. And then you have a different concept of the facility as in other cases where you have organizations that even might run multiple facilities. And also the question, are the instruments distinct from the facilities, or is that one part of another? That is also something that people have, say, different ideas in mind, and that makes then a difference of what you see the facility to be. And of course, also the people. So the people that run and manage the facility, is that facility staff, or is that the staff of the organization that operates the facility? All of these things there are different, say, concepts of that. And these say, secondary differences in the semantic model. That is actually making the differences in the concept of facilities. That leads then to different conclusions of what to use for PIDs. And that was already, say, my bit of the presentation, and I hand over to Siobhan.
Oh, thanks very much for that, Rolf. So coming out of that discussion, we decided at one of our meetings, our regular meetings, that we would begin collecting use cases to get this conversation moving again. So we ended up collecting 16 use cases, and those were from throughout members of the PIDs group, but also folks they know, other people in their discipline areas. And what we saw was probably not anything we didn't already know, that there's really a split between two major persistent identifiers used, which is RAW and RRIDs, other or none, 5, and one person using Wikidata, because someone always uses Wikidata. The locations that those use cases were collected from were for international organisations, so which had nodes or other organisations throughout the world: Australia, the United States, Europe, and Germany. So we need to be aware of where our discussion is situated. That's where it's situated. It's still very Eurocentric, Anglocentric, outside of Europe. So from those use cases, I've extrapolated a few points to discuss, and this is where I really want you all to get opinionated. I want to hear your thoughts. So the first thing to discuss is, as Rolf mentioned, what do you think a facility is? We know what our use cases have said, but we also want to hear from people outside of that small group. There's a difference in the use cases between North America, Europe, and Australian examples. The reasons for that are diverse. I know some of those reasons, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on those. Should there be an international recommendation coming out of this work, given that there's been such a difference across the locations? The definition of a facility. What are the most common and most practical definitions for an international recommendation if we were to make one? So what are the traits of a facility? Is it physical hardware? Is it an organisational layer? Is it a location? Here's where we start having a chat. What's your thoughts about what is a facility? My friend with the microphone. Can I have a microphone to share? Oh, this one. Yeah, please come up and speak into the microphone if you want, or I'll hand it to you.
Testing, testing.
Hello, I'm Chris Seal from the University of Auckland. I think, in my mind, one of the reasons that we're having a difficulty in describing a facility is that we have different purposes for identifying that. And I wonder whether a better approach would be to figure out what the commonality is and what is the purpose of this group of use cases, and define PIDs that are appropriate to addressing that purpose. An example would be, I have a collection of instruments, I would like to collect metrics and aggregate them. That would look quite different to, I have an instrument, I want to provide information about the organisation so people can reach out and contact me.
Can I just add a third? A third purpose would be research related, use of the instrument in research. So,
So Elizabeth Newbold from the Science and Technology Facilities Council in the UK. I had a question about, you talked about the geographic differences in the use cases and the definitions and concepts of facilities. Is there a disciplinary difference as well in the concept of, and what a facility is. So STFC, where I work, we have facilities. We have the ISIS and neutron neuron source. We have the central laser facility. We're also a funder of facilities, which I noticed on your organisational semantic thing. As an organisation, we're a funder, but not directly operating them, but we're also funding them. And as UKRI, as our wider organisation, we also fund other facilities and also operate the facilities, but they might be a ship.
We have quite a few ships mentioned,
so
actually.
I suppose this is I'm just adding to the complexities, and I'm sorry I haven't engaged in what you've done before,
No.
so I was just wondering where all this fits in.
It's a really important question. There's certainly disciplinary splits into what a facility is. There's also a really interesting split that's you can directly relate to funding. So in North America, there's been, I think, a 3-year project from the National Science Foundation looking at identifiers, the FAIR identifiers for instruments and facilities. But one of the kind of co-project members is RRID. So everything involved in it has an RRID, which is great, but it also, we have to look at who's funding what. Go for it.
Hi, I'm Matt Mernick, and I'm the PI of the project you just described. So
I'm so
I
glad
can-
you're here,
can
Matt. Please say anything you
characterize
want
it a
to.
little bit more. So our project has been coordinating within the U.S. primarily around some of these same questions, and just a couple things I can add on at this point, which is that your comment about different types of things comes up every time you have somebody new coming in, right? We have a satellite. Well, what is that? Is it a facility? Is it a platform? Is it an instrument? Some people talk about research sites, and they have sort of the same goal, right? Like a well or something, and they want to understand what information that comes from the well. So that the types of things keep expanding, and I think it's hard to rein that in. The second observation gets to your point about the use cases, and I think that's been a way that, for us, it's been really helpful to try to get some traction on this, is what are you trying to do with an identifier or identification? And I think the ones you described are ones we've discussed as well. So it's the citation or sort of traceability impact metrics case, the sort of discovery or access one, and then sort of reproducibility is one that comes up a lot. Right? I want to know exactly what instrument was used, what configuration, so that I could potentially redo it. And a related one of that is sort of provenance, which is you don't necessarily want to redo it, but you want to understand those traces so you can have some transparency. And I think the way that you might go about identification could be quite different depending on those use cases, where for the provenance and reproducibility use cases, a really fine-grained set of identification might be needed to understand all the components, whereas the citation use cases may be just, I need one identifier so I can I can search it in Google or something. So the use case, I think, is definitely an important part of this discussion.
Any more additions to that discussions?
Excellent. Okay. I'll move us over to our second point of discussion.
And by the way, do we have anybody observing the online participants?
Just remember, Matthias? Thank you, sir.
So, of course, we warmly invite also a discussion from the online participants.
Yeah, please do.
An online participant, Carlos Martinez from the Netherlands eScience Centre, doesn't have a question, but has provided a link to collaborative notes for everyone to access. So if you would like to access that yourself, then please go to the online part, join the session, and you can get the link there. I'm just thinking about
You can also get it right here.
Oh yeah, there's a nice big QR code for people in the room. Sorry, back to discussion one. Sorry, I've been cogitating while you folks have been talking. Could you go back one slide, please,
Yeah,
Siobhan?
no problem.
Sorry, I'm Matthias Liffers. I'm from the Australian Research Data Commons. I'm the product manager for RAID. And I've actually been thinking sometimes a facility could almost be a project as well. Ooh, mind blown. Maybe. But certainly within Australia, we have a major infrastructure funding scheme called NCRIS. And NCRIS is, in fact, what the ARDC is funded by. and a lot of other facilities are organised by, I think the fancy word they use is capability.
It's capability. Yep.
And in fact, that word capability is an interesting one because to me, a facility is a place where a researcher can access the ability to do something. And thinking at the base level, okay, cool, an electron microscope. What about a concert hall? Or a boat? I mean, we've already had that
boats,
example come
yep.
out, boats. And I'd also absolutely like to extend the definition to include computing facilities, supercomputing facilities, where the HPC is an instrument,
Yep.
even though it's not necessarily a machine that goes ping, it goes whir. So yeah, so I like, so yeah, accessing the ability to do something that the researcher couldn't normally do otherwise in their own context. And certainly with NCRIS, the idea is that we provide these big capabilities at a national scale. But at a legal side, and the way these are organisationally structured, the ARDC, for example, is a company not limited by guarantee and a registered non-profit. It exists as a legal entity. Whereas there are some other NCRIS capabilities that legally do not exist. They are, in fact, a project operated by a host organisation and are funded as a project to provide instrumentation, or sorry, capability.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I don't want to add more words to a definition. I really like a nice tight definition, but yeah, perhaps the word capability could be in there somewhere.
Yeah, I love that definition.
Sorry, just to stay on this one more time, and thinking with NCRIS. So my name is Brian Ware. I'm at Curtin University in Australia, in Perth. And I am primarily funded through Oscope, which is an NCRIS funding body, I guess, gets funded by NCRIS. Anyways, so just to kind of also think about use cases that probably detail some of the ones that have been mentioned already or intimately related, let's say. But one thing we're interested in with PIDs and for instrumentation is to think of replacing decadal instrumentation, so instruments that are at end of life, and then being able to sort of, well, monitor maybe a bit better when that end of life is coming, but then also, of course, when you're making the pitch that this is worth replacing, to then be able to more effectively and efficiently show the outcome of that instrumentation. And I think for us, that's also why, for me, kind of separating facility and instrument at least. Oh, also I'm a geochemist, so geochemist facilities. So for me also, that sort of makes it a little easier to separate a PID from a facility and an instrument, because we're not really going to think of facilities in that sense of replacing decadal instrumentation, but certainly a facility will have a certain amount of instrumentation that it needs to keep up, and then having that to track. So to kind of add or detail one of the use cases.
Yeah, nice. Just a detail on that, of course, that hierarchy exists also within instruments, because at least larger instruments have sensors, which are, again, components of that instrument.
Thank you. Helen Spindler from the National Imaging Facility, which is another NCRIS capability. And thank you, Matthias. Very interesting point. And it's made me think that some of the work that we're doing in a network space, in setting up data networks, is also how do we capture that? Because we have instruments that will sit within different networks and sit within different facilities. But it's, yeah, just another layer. Thank you.
I wonder, Matt, would you maybe be able to weigh in on that? Because there were some great discussions in the recent workshops in Boulder about how do you describe these things. Is there anything you could add there? Describing a network. I know there was talk about, is a plane a facility or an instrument, these kind of things. I wonder if there's anything there.
Yeah, I think as I was saying before, we've sort of seen a continual sort of expansion of the types of things that people see falling into this discussion. And so at my organization, which is the National Center for Atmospheric Research in the United States, we've assigned identifiers to supercomputing facilities, who somebody mentioned, airplane, and then some kind of deployable instrumentation, such as radar systems and sensor kind of capabilities for atmospheric research. Yeah, I think, in terms of describing them, I know your next slide is about PID systems and metadata, but I think that's a consideration as well, as what metadata capabilities do these PID types provide, and the PID schema, kind of to what extent has that been embedded into these systems. Something that really came out of the workshop we just did recently, so I'm sorry if I'm jumping ahead in what you're going to talk about, but is also thinking about PIDs as, and maybe even more so thinking about PIDs as connection points than as single identifiers for a single thing. So as you pointed out in your figure, Rolf, there's lots of connections between things, most of which or all of which on that diagram also have PIDs of a different type. And so an important kind of consideration here is when you have a PID for whatever it is you're calling it, a facility of whatever type, how would you connect it to data sets or organizations if those have PIDs, or people? So that's a capability sort of consideration for the PID discussion, which we'll get into probably, of can they enable these types of connections and sort of, in some sense, use the PID connections to be that description of that entity.
Yeah, great.
So I'm June, a software engineer from Terrestrial Ecosystem Research Network, also funded by INCRIS. So in our instrument usage is like we have different platforms, and the researchers, they conduct the field surveys and use instruments to do field observations, like the plant height and also like the temperature of the site. So we also use the PIDs to like identify the instruments. And for instruments, we have two types of the, so for example, for physical instruments with serial number, they have the PIDs. And we also have the control vocabularies to represent the type of the instrument. So everything is managed by semantic web artifacts. So that brings to this question is like, so we use the PIDs, and how can we connect the PIDs, the instrument PIDs with the actual data sets? Our solution is like, we use the knowledge graphs, we build the foundation model of that and link every PIDs together via our information model. And I also agree with OSCOPE comment. So how can we track the decades of replacements for instruments? That's very important, because I like instruments, they have the calibration and validation process. So to replace the instrument, we also need to link them. And that's our concern, like how can we link them and how can we manage them? And how can the previous calibration and validation information be helpful for later activities? Yeah, so I think I'm happy to have further discussions with people who are interested in this, because we also we all want to like link our data sets, or link the instruments with our data sets, and to provide some practical experience with each other.
It's great for me to have all these INCRIS facility people in one room. With my other hat, I'm the product manager for PID services at the ARDC, and part of my work is the INCRIS PID strategy. So I'm going to come and talk to you all. But putting my other hat back on, I feel like it's a nice segue for us to head into talking about PIDs themselves. So the other thing to really come out of these use cases was that there are a lot of persistent identifiers around. There is discussion as well about what is a persistent identifier. And there needs to be a bit of work here on why are folks using a specific PID? how are they using it, and how can it be used? For example, there was a clarification about RAW. We use RAW a lot here because we have a lot to do with those folks here in Australia, and they clarified for us use cases around parent-child relationships. So we're really happy to use RAW in that case. But it might not work for other people for their use, for example, when you're looking at core facilities. So there's horses for courses there. And again, clarifications on RIDs. Is a core a specific type of facility that needs its own PID? We need to talk about these persistent identifiers that are already in use, how are they being used and how can we use them? So I'd love to hear from folks here about what you're using and how you're using it, or any thoughts about how other people are using it. Who's wrong?
Maybe I add myself to the speakers list. Shame on me, we from our community did not yet submit our use case to the document, but we are almost done. But we would add another PID type to that, say, portfolio, and that would be DOIs. And the question, another thing, the question about RAWs, it all falls on the question whether your facility is an organization or not. Yeah. If not, then I would doubt that RAW is the right thing to do.
Yeah. Sorry, I'd just like to clarify with RAID, RAW is the default identifier supported in RAID for organizations. We support DOIs for the inputs and outputs and things used in research, so instruments there. And we are planning to add support for RRIDs as another kind of identifier for the inputs, outputs, and things used during research.
Who's using what? What are you using? When you identify a facility, who's using what? You don't even need to tell us why. I just want to know.
So, hey, my name is Asta Mathur. I work at Eurobiomaging ERIC, so we're a research infrastructure in Europe. So we actually ended up using ROR-ID as well. I mean, for us, it's a little bit easier because we are a research infrastructure, so we have an address, a geolocation, and whatever is needed for the ROR-ID. But it was interesting for us to also figure out the sort of a relation that you're talking about between us and the facilities that are part of Eurobiomaging. So we are a distributed research infrastructure. We have currently 247 individual sites that are part of Eurobiomaging. So at what level do we say the relationship is? So actually, for us, it was important that the relationship can be non-directional. So it's not like it's not a parent-child, right? Because we're not a parent. We're just related, is what we would like to say. Yeah. So because I mean, again, there are political implications of everything that we mentioned. So. However, I do want to come back to, I think you were mentioning that before, that so our facilities are usually embedded in a university.
Yep.
So who gets the ROR and how are they connected, and are the departments talking to each other? So, I mean, this is for me also just interesting to understand how other people are using this, because this is something that we have faced ourselves. So something that we're also trying to deal with.
Hi, Johan from Australian Biocommons. I'm also here representing the Workflow Hub registry. We have a use case for the Workflow Hub registry, which is basically trying to identify the provenance of a workflow execution. The easy version of that is what HPC facility did you use? The complex version is what transient environment did you use to execute? So in cloud or a virtual machine or something like that. So we haven't necessarily picked what we would want to use, but I'm here to try and find out what we could be using to actually accurately represent that within the registry so that we can actually contribute to those cross connections.
Yeah, virtual environments or configurations or whatever you name it is yet another, say, field of complexity.
Yeah, software platforms, all these emerging kind of facilities as well, or capabilities.
Yeah, thanks. So we primarily use DOIs, as Rolf said as well, in my organization. The first PID we assigned to a supercomputer over 10 years ago at this point, we used an ARC, simply because we weren't sure that DOI would make sense, and ARC was sort of, in some sense, more deletable if it didn't work. But then it seemed to get some uptake, and so subsequent generations have used DOIs. In general, on this point, what we've heard in our project, so at our most recent workshop, we had some discussion on this as well, and what was really helpful for me was that some of the organizations that run these were at our workshop and kind of described what was the motivation of their identifier. And so with the case of ROR, it was to identify, have a persistent affiliation organization. So, you know, I'm an author on a paper, and my affiliation is associated with a ROR so that it's consistent from paper to paper and from me to my colleague who might list my organization's name differently. So it was not created to be sort of a cited identifier in a citation context. And you see that citation indexes don't have RORs as a sort of thing. So RORs is sort of an affiliation, that's what it's intended to support. Our RIDs were designed to support things that would be mentioned in methods sections. And this came out of the bioscience, neuroscience community, where, you know, particular reagent or, you know, a mouse strain or genes, or, you know, things that needed identifiers, laboratory equipment. And so that's why it's sort of, you usually see it as a label, not a resolvable URL in methods sections. Again, it was not necessarily designed to be a citable, something in a citation. Whereas, of course, that's what a DOI is for. So I think that's back to the use case point. If what you want is to connect people to organizations, or organizations to organizations in sort of an affiliation sense, ROR makes sense. If it's something that you want people to list in their methods sections, along with all the other things they use in their methods, maybe RID makes sense. There's some disciplinary considerations there because they're very heavily bio-weighted right now. And if your citation is a use case, well, to me, which was always ours, that's why we use DOIs. So I think the use case and the capabilities are really critically connected in this discussion.
Yeah.
It's kind of an observation about ROR, because RORs are assigned to you. We've got RORs for our organisation. We haven't gone out and asked for them. So so some of our facilities have got a ROR because they've got this parent-child relationship, and then other things that could be seen as a facility don't, and we haven't necessarily gone out and asked for them and made a conscious decision about that for all sorts of reasons. So it's kind of a bit, if you've already got a ROR as an organisation, or there's one there, then it's kind of there. And it's back to your point about what's the purpose of it, but why would you then consciously then assign a different type of ID to the same thing? And it gets a bit confusing. So I suppose it's just that conceptually about how the different identifier systems work as well. It's just an observation. But it's another complexity, I think, that makes it a bit difficult to say what's the appropriate PID for a facility, because some of them have already been given them.
Yeah, I mean, just a remark on that. That comes back exactly to that semantic model. So if you identify the organization operating the facility with the facility, if that is one thing for you, then of course you say, okay, I have more identifiers, multiple identifiers for the same thing. If these are distinct, if you have an organization and a facility which are not the same thing, then
I'd just like to make a comment about the sort of provenance idea, and I think I wonder whether if we take a somewhat looser definition of what an instrument is, then the kind of configuration that you were describing, you know, what is the particular workflow, what is the virtual machine that's been set up, that could be more appropriately defined as an instrument using PIDs than a facility, in my mind in any case.
Sorry to complicate the thing more, but in Switzerland, we have the option. So I work in the university, so the university has ROR, all great. But within the university, we have core facilities that are not integrated to any faculties. They are perpendicular to all faculties. So for example, I give you an example for provenance. So we have a core facility that is called Next Generation Sequencing Platform. And it's a platform that does sequencing for multiple sub-organizations within the, and this, let's call it facility, because it's a core facility, has instruments that are similar to instruments that are in specific organization subsections of the university. So for provenance, I've been pushing the idea of we need something to say this is not just this type of instrument, because we have the same instrument in an institute. This is an instrument that is part of this core facility, because the core facility has, of course, HPC and other stuff that is included in the core facility. So for me, I was pushing for the RRID, so like the research resource, because we don't really need full descriptor of anything but is this core facility, because everything else comes from the instrument itself or whatever standard operation procedure is associated to the PID, hopefully. So that's why I keep pushing the idea for our, but that's just a very specific case, and I don't want to say like everyone has to think of it like this. Thanks.
I wouldn't say it's so specific.
Sorry, I have a question. We don't use the phrase core facility in Australia. So what does it mean in your context? Because I've also heard it being used by people in the US, and it sounds like they use it in a different way. Sorry, I'll pass the mic back to you.
Okay, and then we will pass it to someone from the US so we can realize that they're two different things. So the issue, for specifically in the University of Bern, that is a very specific thing of the canton of Bern. So it's not just Switzerland, it's the specific canton. The core facility is the way that they found to put the budget coming from canton and university management without going through faculties. Because faculties, don't quote me on this, but because faculties, due to this confederation thing that Switzerland has, have a very specific way of describing the budget and how they spend the budget. Meanwhile, core facilities are a little bit more loosey-goosey, and they just put a board and then they allow to do that. So this is the, let's call it political justification of a core facility from our point of view. Therefore, they cannot depend on faculties. That's what I know from Switzerland. I have no idea what they're doing in the US.
This is also for Europe in general. So we have
okay, good, good.
So I'm Georgette from the University of Adelaide. I'm the senior manager of the biobank, which is a core facility. So we do actually use the terminology of core facility in Australia. The University of Adelaide has got different core facilities. So the biobank is one of those, microscopy is one of those, animal lab services. So there's different, and it uses the same system that you've just mentioned. So a core facility is because it's centralised funding. So we see under the Division of Research and Innovation, the funding comes from that. So that way all of our faculty researchers can use the facility, but the funding does not come from the faculties. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So in these contexts, the facilities are core to the institution. Okay, because sometimes when I hear folks from the US, I don't know if anyone will be able to correct me, it sounds like their core facilities are core to the nation, and these core facilities, no? Okay, shaking your head like that. Okay, cool, all right. Well, I'm educated, thank you very much.
We've got Rory who can weigh in on this.
Sorry, let me add that I
of
doubt that there is a clear definition of core facility, and everybody uses that term a little bit differently.
commenting on my understanding of the U.S. So I think one aspect of core facilities is that they provide services. They provide services to others, like labs. So at a good example, I remember going to every year, the Harvard Medical School has a showcase for their core facilities. And 120 core facilities, they're trying to sell their services. So the labs come and say, I want to use the NMR core facility, or this facility, or that facility. Maybe there's national ones as well, but that's a very common description of how it works in US universities.
So what about competence centers? Where do we use competence centers? Because just realizing this, that if we say a core facility is associated to an organization, like for example, a university, we have competence centers that are associated to multiple universities. Oh, wow. And then we have a use of core facilities for specific universities that are used from different universities due to this competence center. So Vet Suisse for veterinary, they have specific instruments that they are owned and kept through core facility from University of Bern, but they're used for research from Zurich. How do we, I'm just giving you an example, how do we sort of put all of that in the ride? I don't know. That's why I'm here.
So something you said then just kicked off a connection in my head, and apologies. So I'm quite new to this, so if this is already like known, do tell me, like, and I'll go look it up. But I'm wondering about the difference between an identifier for an identifier's sake, and then all the contextual stuff, right? So when you look at FAIR for data, software, workflows, it doesn't matter. The persistent identifier is embedded there because it allows you to then resolve to rich metadata that's domain specific. So what are the use cases where you need that context? Because that context feeds into exactly what you're talking about, which is what's the network that sits around that core?
Maybe I'd like to answer to that myself. First of all, let me say, give a little bit context. We run a synchrotron light source, which is a facility, obviously. It has multiple instruments. We are using the PID-INS schema for DOIs according to the PID-INS recommendation for identifying the instruments. And in general, so my phrasing of it would be, you want to use a PID if you want to make statements about a certain thing. If you want to say, this data has been taken at that instrument, then that instrument needs a PID in order to point to that. We didn't attribute PIDs to facility yet, but we might do in the near future. And then we would probably use, again, DOIs, again using the PID-INS schema, because if you look at that, everything that I would need to describe the facility is available in the attributes of the PID-INS schema, so more or less. And other way around, everything that is in the PID-INS schema pretty much applies to facilities as well. So that I would say facilities are not so different from instruments in that aspect. And I would like to have a PID for the facility because our organization used to run a neutron reactor until 2019. It still runs a synchrotron light source. We have instruments, and I would like to make the statement that beamline was a beamline at the reactor. So I need to point to the reactor as a facility. And another beamline is a beamline at our synchrotron light source.
Just to follow up on that a little bit, I think another important thing to think about here is that the PID it's this particular thing, and they have limitations, and they don't solve everything themselves. As I said earlier, each of these has metadata associated with it. As you were touching on, Rolf, that there's certain metadata that might be associated with these identifiers, and each of these metadata schemas have certain capabilities and standards themselves, right? Things that they enable, things that they don't enable. Furthermore, wherever your PID is pointing to, there should be additional metadata. And hopefully there is. So, depending on what context and use case you're talking about, the PID is not necessarily solving all of the problem of providing all of the context and all of the connections, but hopefully it's pointing to something that can. And again, some PID metadata types do provide explicit semantics for describing links to metadata. The DataSite DOIs do, for example. But regardless, I think my point is that think about PIDs and metadata as sort of a triangle of relationships. There's the identifier itself, there's the identifier metadata, and then there's whatever other metadata might be associated with both the PID at the sort of hosting site or the original site. And in combination, hopefully those can be used to provide context and descriptions and connections and things. But maybe any one of those maybe can't do all of it.
Yeah, I agree with you. Because we publish the ecological data sets, and we have the researchers, they often provide us with their org IDs. But we also have our own version of the PIDs. So we register our own namespaces, and we also use the W3 ID. So different kinds of PIDs, like DOI for datasets and IGSN for samples. What we do is because we are publishing their datasets, we can't do update or editing, something like that. So we preserve everything they provide. They provide us with their org IDs, so we link our IDs with their IDs. And all of the IDs and their relationships, is it an exact match or broader or lateral? So all of these relationships are preserved on our database in our website. So every PID is traceable and is linked with other PIDs. That's what we do. So we preserve them, we link them, provide the PID linkage, and we use the suitable PIDs for the use cases. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Any more comments? Anything from online participants?
Okay. Well, thanks very much for all of these points and examples. I think it's clear that it's a pretty complex area of discussion and differs geographically and by discipline, by funding type. And I don't think we're going to get a simple solution to any of this, but going forward with this discussion, can I do this? No. Back to that. Oh, hang on. I've broken the internet, excuse me. Help IT. That's okay. I'm just trying to get back into my slides so people can see them.
So just on this point of which one to choose, and the complexity and all that, if you're sort of in the situation of needing to choose or wanting to choose one, and where our workshop, and this workshop happened 2 weeks ago, so we haven't even written up our report. We're hoping to have it out in a month or two, but where we kind of ended up in our discussion was the systems that we're talking about here, at least, you know, RRID, ROR, DOI, they're all pretty mature and pretty well established at this point and have lots of embeddings in other systems. So, yeah, you know, don't be paralyzed by which one to choose. You know, picking any one of them, again, thinking about the use case and things we talked about earlier, you probably will get something out of it. So it doesn't have to be a concern that I chose the wrong one and now I've got nothing out of it. So all of these systems are pretty mature and well established, and so will provide some capabilities, regardless of which one you choose.
Yeah, good recommendation.
So you want that slide up? Yeah. Okay. Genius.
Sorry, I might have just missed it, but do you have examples, like good examples of how people have adopted these, or a combination of these or versions of these? Because I think that could also be something quite encouraging to share, to understand what those people, I mean, what their challenges were and how they have come up to a conclusion of like using a set of identifiers for their workflows. I think that would be nice to have for the public to see. So the question is, like, is there a place where we can find these use cases that...
Is that what your use cases are?
Yeah. We can absolutely share them. They're meant to be shared. So maybe this takes us on to our last slide really nicely. Going forward, what can we do in this space? So one of the things I think we can easily do is share the draft from the use cases, make that really accessible. And also the work that's coming out of the States. There'll also be an Australasian best practices coming out at the end of the year from the ARDC. So we can make sure that those are shared through the PIDs group, and please spread it around everywhere. I think we probably need to do a little bit more work in this area. I'm not going to suggest a working group because our lives are all way too busy for that. But if you want to be involved in this discussion, please join the PIDs group. Please come to meetings. We have an Australia-friendly and a European-friendly time. I can see that there's really clear geographic clusters that need to be gathered more to look at commonalities. For example, the core facility example, and you've got a very specific example in Switzerland that might not happen somewhere else, or it might happen in another European area. So I think we do need to look at recommendations coming out of this group. It would be lovely to have one single recommendation around facilities. I think we're probably going to have a recommendation for Europe, a recommendation for North America, recommendation for Australasia come out, that kind of thing, rather than a single one.
I doubt that is just regional. I guess it is, say, domain specific.
Yeah, all of those things.
That's what I was just going to ask, because I was wondering, you know, some of our commonalities might not be through our region, but for example, our synchrotrons would probably want to be thinking the same thing.
Should have said discipline as well. You're quite right. Geographical and discipline specific. For example, the folks from the imaging community in Australia are probably one of the strongest voices in this conversation. So we're going to end up with some really great imaging advice. If anyone from another sector wants to get involved, that would be great too.
Yeah, I mean, the idea with that document that we still want to compile is to present a couple of case studies. And all of these people do things for very good reasons, because it fits for their concept. And I would say if we present these different cases next to each other, that would already be the substantial help, because then you can situate yourself, your own situation, among all these cases and see whether that conclusion that these guys took fit for you, and then you have an informed choice, I would say. And I don't think we will come up with one single recommendation.
If I could make a request, when you're going through and doing that analysis, you also consider the purpose and what is the purpose of the identifier in that use case.
Yep.
Because I think there's probably more commonality in the use, the purpose of the PID, rather than the region.
Yeah, you've taken the words right off my page. My second point there is that I think our use cases will need to concentrate on the reason for the PID, and that can include using a specific type of persistent identifier because it does certain things, or for a certain purpose. I think that's going to be a more useful way to look at what people are doing rather than... our use case collection was very broad. Not many guidelines. Cool. Okay, so I think in the near future you'll hear from the PID-Inst group with a little bit of a summary and about what's going to happen going forward. Please, as always, come and have a chat. Rolf, myself, anyone else you see here. If you're interested in identifiers for instruments, there's also a casual meetup tomorrow in one of the cafes, Olio, down the end there, organised by the Australian Identifiers for Instruments group, and we'd like to invite anyone else who's interested to come and talk about instruments and drink coffee. I think it's at 12, but come and check with me.
I didn't know that one. You should have told me.
I know. We just decided. So thank you all for your time. Any finishing up comments? I know lunch is coming soon, so don't worry, we feel it too.
I mean, if you want to stay informed, I would just suggest sign up to the Persistent Identification of Instrument Working Group. There will definitely be some group postings coming along with, say, results, hopefully.
For sure. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great afternoon.